You asked for it. Now eat it!
An 8-year-old boy with 30 minutes left to live whispered one impossible wish to his mother. "Can the Hells Angels bring me barbecue?" A desperate nurse posted it on Facebook, and what happened next defied every doctor in Phoenix. 45 bikers, portable smokers, and a miracle that medical science couldn't explain. Before we get into this story, I need to know, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments, and if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now. Now let's get into the story. Phoenix, Arizona didn't believe in gentle endings. Even in November, the desert heat lingered like an unwelcome guest, turning the air thick and heavy. Inside Phoenix Children's Hospital on East Thomas Road, the air conditioning hummed constantly, fighting a battle it could never quite win. But in room 347 on the 3rd floor, temperature didn't matter anymore. Time was the only thing that mattered, and time had just run out. Dr. Patricia Nguyen stood in the hallway outside Mason Carter's room, her clipboard pressed against her chest like armor that didn't work. She'd been a pediatric oncologist for 17 years, long enough to know that some conversations never got easier, no matter how many times you had them. She'd rehearsed the words in her head 3 times on the walk from the nurse's station, but they still felt like broken glass in her mouth. Rachel Carter sat in the chair beside her son's bed, the same chair she'd been living in for the past 6 days. She hadn't gone home, hadn't showered properly, hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had given up trying to be neat sometime around Tuesday. She wore the same University of Arizona hoodie she'd thrown on when the hospital called at 3 in the morning with the words every parent dreaded, "You should come now." Dr. Nguyen knocked softly, even though the door was open. Professional courtesy for a moment that had no courtesy in it. Rachel looked up, and Dr. Nguyen saw in her eyes that she already knew. Mothers always knew. "Can we talk outside?" Dr. Nguyen's voice was gentle, the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered impossible news for a living. Rachel glanced at Mason, who was sleeping, his chest rising and falling with the mechanical rhythm of the oxygen machine, doing most of the work his lungs couldn't manage anymore. His face was pale, almost translucent, his 8-year-old body reduced to 42 pounds of skin and bones, and a spirit that had fought longer than any doctor thought possible. He'd been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 3 years ago, right after his 5th birthday party at the Chuck E. Cheese on Indian School Road. 3 years of chemo, radiation, clinical trials, bone marrow transplants, hope, and heartbreak. Rachel stood slowly, her joints stiff from too many hours in that chair, and followed Dr. Nguyen into the hallway. The fluorescent lights felt accusing, too bright, too clinical for a moment like this. "How long?" Rachel's voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of someone who'd already shattered and was just holding the pieces together through pure will. Dr. Nguyen had learned over 17 years that honesty, even brutal honesty, was kinder than false hope. His kidneys are failing. His heart is working too hard. Maybe 30 minutes. Maybe an hour. "I'm sorry, Rachel. There's nothing else we can do." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Rachel nodded once, twice, then a 3rd time, as if repetition could make the impossible possible to accept. She didn't cry. She'd done all her crying over the past 3 years, during chemo sessions that left Mason vomiting for days, during the relapse last spring when they'd thought they'd beaten it, during the quiet moments at 2 in the morning when Mason was sleeping, and she could let herself imagine a future that would never happen. "Can I?" Rachel's voice cracked. She tried again. Can I go back in? Of course. Take your time. We'll keep him comfortable. If there's anything he wants, anything at all, just tell Sophia. We'll make it happen. Rachel walked back into room 347 like she was walking into a church, quiet and reverent and terrified. The room was small, barely bigger than a hotel room, but Mason had made it his own over the past 6 months of near-constant hospitalization. The walls were covered in crayon drawings, most of them featuring motorcycles. Dozens of motorcycles in every color imaginable, some with riders, some alone, all of them drawn with the shaky hand of a child who loved something he'd never gotten close enough to touch. The obsession had started 6 months ago when the hospital moved him to this room on the east side of the building. From his window he could see a stretch of Grand Avenue, and every Saturday afternoon, like clockwork, a group of motorcycles would ride past. Harleys, dozens of them, their engines roaring loud enough to hear even through the double-pane glass. Mason would press his face against the window, his eyes lighting up with the only joy Rachel had seen in months. "Hell's Angels," he'd whispered the first time, reading the patches on their vests through the binoculars a kind nurse had brought him. After that, he'd drawn nothing but motorcycles, talked about nothing but motorcycles, asked Rachel to read him articles about motorcycle clubs, about the history of the Hells Angels, about the meaning of brotherhood and loyalty and riding free on American highways. Rachel sat down in her chair and took Mason's small hand. It was so light, like holding a bird. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they still held that brightness that made him Mason, instead of just another dying child in a hospital bed. "Hey, baby," Rachel whispered, forcing a smile that hurt her face. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, Mom." His voice was barely audible over the oxygen machine. "Really tired." Rachel felt her heart crack wider. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd make it okay. But there was no making this okay. There was only making it bearable. "Mason, honey, is there anything you want? Anything at all?" She squeezed his hand gently. "Ice cream? We could get Rocky Road from Baskin-Robbins. Or maybe you want to watch a movie? We could watch Cars again. I know you love that one." Mason's eyes drifted to the window, to the view of Grand Avenue where the motorcycles rode. He was quiet for so long that Rachel thought he'd fallen back asleep. Then he turned his head, looked at her with those impossibly bright eyes, and said something that made time stop. "Can the Hells Angels bring me barbecue?" Rachel blinked, not sure she'd heard correctly. "What, sweetheart?" "The Hells Angels." Mason's voice was stronger now, more focused than it had been in days. "The ones who ride past on Saturdays. Can they come here and bring barbecue? Like a real cookout with the smoker and everything?" He paused, struggling for breath. "I want to smell the smoke, Mom. Like summer. Like when Dad was alive and we'd have cookouts in the backyard." Rachel's vision blurred with tears. Mason's father, David, had died 5 years ago in a construction accident on the I-10 expansion project, crushed when scaffolding collapsed. He'd been the one who taught Mason about loyalty, about hard work, about being a good man in a world that didn't always reward goodness. And he'd made the best ribs in Phoenix, slow-smoked over mesquite wood in their tiny backyard in South Phoenix. "Baby, I don't know if—" Rachel started, but stopped. What was she going to say? That it was impossible? That she didn't know any Hells Angels? That the hospital wouldn't allow it? None of that mattered. Her son had maybe 30 minutes left, and he'd just asked for one thing. One simple, impossible thing. "I'll try," Rachel whispered. "I promise I'll try." Mason smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen in weeks. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." He closed his eyes, exhausted from the effort of speaking. Rachel stood up, walked to the door, and found Nurse Sophia standing just outside. Sophia was young, maybe 26, with kind eyes and a sleeve of tattoos she usually kept covered under her scrubs. She'd been Mason's favorite nurse for months, the one who smuggled him extra pudding cups and stayed late to play video games with him when the pain was too bad to sleep. "Did you hear?" Rachel's voice was breaking apart. Sophia nodded, her own eyes wet. "I heard. I don't know how to make this happen. I don't know any bikers. I don't even know where their clubhouse is." Rachel was crying now, the tears finally coming. "But he asked, Sophia. He asked for one thing and I can't." Sophia grabbed Rachel's hand. "Let me try something. Just give me 5 minutes." She pulled out her phone and opened Facebook. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing fast, purposeful. Rachel watched as Sophia composed a post, attached a photo of Mason from better days, bald from chemo but smiling, holding up a crayon drawing of a motorcycle, and tagged every motorcycle group she could find in the Phoenix area. The post was simple, desperate, and heartbreaking. Urgent. 8-year-old Mason Carter at Phoenix Children's Hospital has less than 1 hour to live. His final wish is for the Hells Angels to bring him barbecue so he can smell the smoke one last time. His dad died 5 years ago, and they used to cook together. If anyone knows anyone in the motorcycle community, please share this. Please help make a dying boy's last wish come true. Room 347, Phoenix Children's Hospital, East Thomas Road. We don't have much time. Sophia hit post and looked at Rachel. "I don't know if this will work, but if there's any chance—" Her phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. Within 30 seconds, the notifications were coming so fast they blurred together. Shares, comments, messages. One message stood out, sent from an account with a skull and crossbones profile picture. "We're 15 minutes out. Tell Mason the nomads are coming." Rachel read it 3 times, not believing what she was seeing. Sophia grabbed her hand and squeezed. "He's going to get his barbecue," Sophia whispered. "Now we just need him to hold on long enough to smell the smoke." 15 miles west of Phoenix Children's Hospital, in a warehouse district off Grand Avenue where the rent was cheap and nobody asked questions, the Arizona Nomads Clubhouse sat like a fortress of chrome and concrete. The building had been a tire shop once back in the 70s, but now it housed something more important than rubber and rims. It housed Brotherhood. Mike Reaper Sullivan was 62 years old, built like a man who'd spent 40 years throwing his weight around and winning. His beard was long and gray, his arms covered in ink that told stories he didn't share with civilians, and his eyes carried the kind of weight that came from seeing too much and surviving anyway. He'd been president of the Arizona Nomads chapter for 12 years, and in that time he'd broken up bar fights, negotiated with cops, and buried 3 brothers who'd ridden their last mile. But he'd never gotten a phone notification quite like this one. His cell phone sat on the workbench where he was replacing the brake pads on his 2015 Street Glide, custom-painted candy apple red with flames that looked like they were moving even when the bike was standing still. The phone buzzed once, then went silent. Reaper ignored it. Phones could wait. Brakes couldn't. Then it buzzed again and again. And then it didn't stop buzzing. Reaper wiped the grease from his hands with a red shop rag and picked up the phone. 37 notifications in the last 2 minutes, all from the same Facebook post that had been shared into the Phoenix Riders United group he followed. He opened it, and the first thing he saw was the photo. A kid, bald, skinny as a rail, but smiling like he had a secret worth keeping. Then Reaper read the post, and the wrench he'd been holding clattered to the concrete floor. 8 years old, less than an hour to live. Final wish, Hell's Angels and barbecue. The kid's name was Mason Carter, and from the photos in the thread, he'd been drawing pictures of motorcycles for months. The comments were already flooding in. People offering prayers, sharing the post, tagging biker groups across Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe, Mesa. But prayers wouldn't get this kid his barbecue. Action would. Reaper looked at the photo again, and something in Mason's eyes hit him like a fist to the solar plexus. He'd seen those eyes before, 15 years ago, on his own son. Tyler Sullivan had been 6 years old when the drunk driver ran the red light on Camelback Road and turned Reaper's entire world into before and after. 6 years old, buckled into his booster seat in the back of his mom's Honda Accord, singing along to some Disney song Reaper couldn't remember anymore. Gone in an instant. The drunk driver walked away with a broken arm and 5 years in prison. Tyler got a headstone in Greenwood Memory Lawn Cemetery and a father who couldn't forgive himself for not being there. Reaper had been in county lockup when it happened, serving 90 days for assault after a bar fight that shouldn't have happened. He'd missed his son's last 3 weeks of life because he'd been too proud and too stupid to walk away from a loudmouth in a Tempe dive bar. Tyler died while Reaper was behind bars, and by the time they let him out for the funeral, his wife had already decided she was done. Done with the club. Done with the lifestyle. Done with him. He hadn't spoken to her in 14 years. Hadn't forgiven himself in 15. But standing in that clubhouse, holding his phone, looking at Mason's photo, Reaper felt something shift. Tyler was gone, and nothing would bring him back. But Mason was still here, for maybe 45 minutes. And if Reaper had learned anything from losing his son, it was that you didn't get second chances. You got one shot to show up, and if you missed it, you lived with that forever. He opened the clubhouse group chat and typed 4 words that would change everything. Church, now emergency. Within 8 minutes, 45 bikers had converged on the clubhouse from every corner of Phoenix. They came from job sites and living rooms, from bar stools and backyard barbecues, dropping everything because when Reaper called church as an emergency, you came. No questions, no excuses. That was the code. The clubhouse chapel was a room in the back with a long wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs, American and Arizona flags on the wall, and a portrait of every brother they'd lost over the years. Reaper stood at the head of the table, his phone in his hand, and waited until every man was seated and silent. "We've got a situation," Reaper said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned every word. 8-year-old kid at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Terminal leukemia. Doctors say he's got maybe 30 minutes left. His final wish is for us to bring him barbecue so he can smell the smoke one last time. He held up his phone, showing Mason's photo. Kid's been watching us ride past his hospital window every Saturday for months. Been drawing pictures of our bikes. Now he's dying, and he wants to meet us before he goes. The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the concrete floor. These were hard men, men who'd done time and fought wars and buried friends. But every single one of them was looking at that photo like it was a gut punch. Bear, the club's sergeant-at-arms and a former Marine who'd done 3 tours in Iraq, spoke first. "What do we need?" "Barbecue. Fast." And we need to get to that hospital in the next 20 minutes, or this kid dies without his wish." Reaper looked around the table. "We've got the smokers from yesterday's rally still loaded. We've got brisket, ribs, pulled pork. What we need is bodies willing to ride and a miracle that says we can make this happen." Stitch, the club's medic and a former Army combat lifesaver, raised his hand. "Hospital's going to have a problem with 45 bikers showing up unannounced. We need someone to call ahead, smooth the way." Reaper nodded. "I'll handle it. Rest of you, mount up. We ride in 5 minutes. Formation. Respectful. No loud pipes, no showboating. This isn't about us. This is about that kid." Torch, a younger member with a shaved head and a scar across his throat from a bar fight gone wrong, stood up. "What if we don't make it in time?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Reaper met his eyes and said the only truth that mattered. "Then we tried, and that's more than most people will do. But we're going to make it, because that kid deserves to get his wish, and we're the only ones who can deliver it." The parking lot of the Arizona Nomads clubhouse looked like a scene from a movie as 45 Harleys fired up simultaneously. The sound was thunder, the kind that rattled windows and made the ground vibrate. Reaper's Street Glide led the formation, flanked by Bear on his Road King and Stitch on his Fat Boy. Behind them, the rest of the chapter fell into a practiced V formation, 2 columns stretching back like wings. They'd loaded the portable smokers into the back of Torch's pickup truck. Massive offset barrel smokers still warm from yesterday's Veterans Appreciation Rally in Glendale. The smokers held brisket that had been cooking for 12 hours, ribs glazed in a sauce recipe older than most of the riders, and pulled pork that fell apart if you looked at it wrong. The smell was intoxicating, the kind of barbecue perfume that made people turn their heads 3 blocks away. Reaper pulled out his phone and dialed the hospital's main line while his bike idled. A receptionist answered on the 3rd ring, her voice professional and detached. "Phoenix Children's Hospital, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to whoever's in charge of room 347. Kid named Mason Carter, it's urgent." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Sir, I can transfer you to the nurse's station, but I can't give out patient information." "Ma'am, I don't need information. I need to tell someone that 45 bikers are about to show up at your hospital with barbecue because that kid asked for it as his dying wish. Now you can either transfer me to someone who can make this happen smooth, or you can let us figure it out when we arrive in 15 minutes. Your call." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Hold, please." Reaper waited, his engine rumbling, watching his brothers check their bikes and adjust their vests. These men didn't know Mason Carter. They'd never met his mother. They had nothing to gain from this except the knowledge that they'd shown up when it mattered. And in the code of the Brotherhood, that was everything. Dr. Patricia Nguyen's voice came through the phone, clipped and professional, but with an edge of something that might have been hope. "This is Dr. Nguyen." "Who am I speaking with?" "Name's Reaper. I'm president of the Arizona Nomads. We're the motorcycle club your patient's been watching from his window. We got barbecue, and we're 15 minutes out. We need to know if you're going to let us in, or if we're going to have a problem with hospital security." There was a long silence on the other end. Reaper could hear the background noise of the hospital. Beeping machines, distant conversations, the controlled chaos of people trying to save lives. Finally, Dr. Nguyen spoke, and her voice was different, softer, human. "Mason's vitals are declining fast. He might not have 15 minutes. "Then we'll make it in 10, Reaper said. "But I need to know, Doc. Are you going to let us give this kid his wish? Or are we going to waste time arguing with security? Another pause, then, how many of you are there? 45. Jesus. Dr. Nguyen exhaled slowly. Okay. Here's what's going to happen. I'm overriding hospital administration on this. You come to the emergency entrance on East Thomas. I'll meet you there personally. You can set up your smokers in the courtyard. It's visible from Mason's window. But I can only allow maybe 10 of you in the room at a time. Deal? Deal, Reaper said. And Doc? Thank you. Don't thank me. Just get here fast. Reaper hung up, raised his hand in the signal every rider knew, and the formation moved as one. 45 Harleys rolled out of the parking lot onto Grand Avenue, heading east toward Phoenix Children's Hospital and a dying boy who'd asked for one impossible thing. The Phoenix Police Department had already been notified. An escort was forming at the intersection of Grand and Indian School Road. This wasn't a parade. This was an emergency run, and every rider knew that 15 minutes might as well be 15 seconds when a kid's life was measured in heartbeats. Phoenix traffic parted like the Red Sea when 45 motorcycles in formation came through with a police escort. Cars pulled to the shoulder on Thomas Road. Pedestrians stopped and stared. Phones came out recording videos that would go viral by nightfall. But none of that mattered to the riders. They weren't here for attention. They were here for Mason. The hospital came into view, a massive complex of buildings connected by skywalks, the windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Reaper could see room 347 from the street. Third floor, east side, a small window with crayon drawings visible even from this distance. The formation slowed, engines dropping to a respectful idle as they approached the emergency entrance where Dr. Nguyen stood waiting, flanked by 2 security guards who looked simultaneously confused and moved. The bikers parked in formation, filling every available space in the emergency lot. Torch's pickup pulled up with the smokers, and immediately the smell of barbecue filled the air. Sweet, smoky, the smell of summer cookouts and family gatherings and memories that lived in your bones. Several nurses had come outside, drawn by the sound and the spectacle, and more than one was crying. Dr. Nguyen approached Reaper as he dismounted. She was a small woman, maybe 5'4", but she carried herself like someone used to being in charge. You actually came. We don't make promises we can't keep, Reaper said. He gestured to the smokers. Where do you want these? Courtyards through those doors. It's an outdoor space between buildings. Mason's window overlooks it. She paused, looking at the 45 men in leather standing in her parking lot. He's still with us, barely, but he's waiting. Reaper felt something in his chest tighten. Tyler hadn't gotten to wait. Tyler had died alone in an ambulance while Reaper sat in a cell. But Mason was going to get his wish, even if it killed Reaper to deliver it. 4 bikers carried the smokers into the courtyard while the rest waited. The setup took less than 3 minutes, practiced hands moving with the efficiency of men who'd set up cookouts at 100 rallies. The smoke began to rise, thick and white, and carrying that unmistakable smell of mesquite wood and slow-cooked meat. Reaper looked up at room 347 and saw a small face pressed against the glass. Mason was watching. Dr. Nguyen led Reaper, Bear, Stitch, and 7 others into the hospital through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and hope and quiet desperation. They passed other rooms where children fought their own battles, parents keeping vigil in chairs that destroyed your back and your soul. Several kids came to their doorways, eyes wide at the sight of bikers walking through the pediatric ward like something out of a dream. One little girl, maybe 5 years old, with a pink scarf covering her bald head, tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered loudly, "Are they superheroes?" Bear, who'd killed men in Fallujah and had nightmares that never quite went away, stopped and knelt down to her level. "We're just guys on motorcycles, sweetheart. But we're here to help a friend." The little girl smiled, and Bear's eyes got suspiciously bright as he stood back up. Room 347 was at the end of the hallway. The door was open, and Reaper could see inside, the crayon drawings covering every inch of wall space, the machines keeping Mason alive, and Rachel Carter sitting beside her son's bed, looking like hope and despair had fought to a draw on her face. Reaper knocked on the door frame even though it was open. Rachel looked up, saw 10 massive men in leather vests standing in the hallway, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Mrs. Carter?" Reaper's voice was gentle, the voice he'd used with Tyler when his son couldn't sleep. "We're the Arizona Nomads. We got your boy's message. Is it okay if we come in?" Rachel couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Mason. The boy's eyes were open now, brighter than they'd been in hours, fixed on the doorway where the bikers stood. Reaper entered first, and he did something he'd only done twice in his life, once at his wedding and once at Tyler's funeral. He took off his sunglasses. He wanted Mason to see his eyes when he made this promise. "Hey there, Mason," Reaper said, kneeling beside the bed so he was at eye level with the boy. "I'm Reaper. Me and my brothers, we got your message about the barbecue. We're setting it up right now in the courtyard outside your window. Can you smell it?" Mason's nostrils flared slightly, and his face transformed. "Ribs?" "Ribs, brisket, pulled pork, the whole spread." Reaper reached out and gently placed his hand on Mason's shoulder. "And we didn't just bring barbecue, little brother. We brought the whole Arizona Nomads chapter. 45 riders, all here because you asked, because riders don't leave family behind." Mason's eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling. "I'm not your family." Reaper felt his throat tighten, felt 15 years of grief and guilt pressing against his ribs. "Yeah, you are. From this moment on, you're a nomad, which means you've got 45 big brothers who'll do anything for you. Understand?" Mason nodded, and Reaper saw in his eyes the same thing he'd seen in Tyler's. Pure, uncomplicated trust that adults could fix anything. Except Reaper hadn't fixed anything for Tyler. But maybe, just maybe, he could fix this. Bear stepped forward, holding a leather vest that looked impossibly small. "We had this made for you, brother. Every nomad gets their colors. These are yours." The vest was child-sized, black leather with the Arizona Nomads patch on the back and a custom rocker underneath that read, "Road Warrior." Mason's eyes went wide as Bear gently draped it over his thin shoulders, careful not to disturb the IV lines and oxygen tubes. "There," Bear said, his voice rough with emotion. "Now you're official." What happened next would be written about in the Phoenix New Times, shared on social media millions of times, and talked about in motorcycle clubs across America for years. 10 bikers crowded into room 347, each one taking turns kneeling beside Mason's bed, introducing themselves, telling him about their bikes and their roads and their brotherhood. Stitch brought in plates of barbecue, ribs so tender they fell off the bone, brisket that melted in your mouth, pulled pork that had been smoking since yesterday. Mason took a bite, and something impossible happened. The monitors that had been showing declining vitals for hours suddenly stabilized. His heart rate, which had been climbing into dangerous territory, normalized. His oxygen saturation improved. Dr. Nguyen, watching from the doorway, saw it happen and couldn't explain it. There was no medical reason for Mason's body to suddenly rally, but rally it did. "It's the will to live," she would later tell reporters. "Sometimes the body holds on because the spirit has something left to experience. Mason's spirit wasn't ready to go. Not yet." The bikers rotated through the room in shifts, 10 at a time, while the rest waited in the hallway or the courtyard. They brought Mason to the window so he could see the smokers, see the 45 Harleys parked in formation below. They told him stories about brotherhood and loyalty, about the open road and the freedom that came with it. They let him touch their vests, showed him their patches, explained what each one meant. Torch showed Mason the scar across his throat and told him about the bar fight that had almost killed him and the brothers who'd saved his life. "That's what family does," Torch said. "They show up when you're bleeding." Mason whispered, "Like you showed up for me." "Exactly like that, little brother." The celebration lasted 6 hours. 6 hours that Mason Carter wasn't supposed to have. 6 hours that defied every medical prediction and proved that sometimes miracles smelled like barbecue smoke and sounded like Harley engines. Other patients and their families heard about what was happening and came to the courtyard. The bikers fed everyone: sick kids, worried parents, exhausted nurses. The hospital's strict visitor policy went out the window as the pediatric ward became an impromptu family reunion. At one point, Mason asked if he could sit on a motorcycle. Dr. Nguyen said absolutely not. Reaper looked at her and said, "Doc, with all due respect, this kid's wearing our colors. That makes him a nomad, and nomads ride." They wheeled Mason's bed outside, IV pole and oxygen tank and all, into the courtyard where Reaper's street glide waited. With Rachel's permission and Dr. Nguyen's reluctant approval, they carefully lifted Mason onto the bike, Reaper sitting behind him to hold him steady. They didn't start the engine. They didn't need to. Mason sat on that Harley with his hands on the handlebars and his face transformed by joy so pure it hurt to witness. "I'm riding," Mason whispered. "Yeah, you are, brother," Reaper said. "You're riding with the nomads, and that's a story that'll live forever." 3 months later, Mason Carter was still alive. The doctors called it unprecedented. The nurses called it a miracle. Rachel called it answered prayer. But Reaper knew what it was. Love in its purest form, delivered by 45 men who'd dropped everything to show up for a dying kid. The Arizona nomads visited Mason every Saturday, the same day they used to ride past his window. They brought barbecue, told stories, and treated him like the brother he'd become. Mason gained weight. His color improved. He started talking about high school and college and maybe riding his own Harley someday when he was older. The cancer was still there. It would always be there, but Mason's body was fighting with a strength that defied medical science. "It's the hope," Dr. Nguyen explained to Rachel during one of Mason's checkups. "Hope is a powerful drug, and those bikers, they gave him something to hope for every single week." On Mason's 9th birthday, the nomads threw him a party at the clubhouse. 75 people showed up, bikers from chapters all over Arizona, nurses from the hospital, kids from Mason's school who'd heard about the boy with the motorcycle club family. They wheeled Mason outside, and he cut his birthday cake surrounded by more love than most people experience in a lifetime. Reaper stood beside Rachel as they watched Mason laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years. "Thank you," Rachel said quietly. "You gave me my son back." "He gave us something too," Reaper replied. He was thinking about Tyler, about 15 years of grief that had finally started to lift. "He reminded us why we ride. It's not about the bikes or the patches or the reputation. It's about showing up when someone needs you. It's about being there." But the story didn't end with a miracle cure. 3 months after his birthday, Mason's body finally surrendered to the cancer that had been eating him alive since he was 5 years old. His kidneys failed again. His heart grew too tired. And on a Saturday morning in February, with Rachel holding one hand and Reaper holding the other, Mason Carter took his last breath. The room was filled with bikers. 45 men who'd become his family, standing in their leather vests with tears streaming down their weathered faces as an 8-year-old warrior finally got to rest. Dr. Nguyen noted in her final report, "Patient exceeded life expectancy by 90 days due to non-medical intervention. Cause of extended survival, love, community, and the determination to live fully in borrowed time." Mason Carter's funeral was held at Greenwood Memory Lawn Cemetery, the same cemetery where Tyler Sullivan had been buried 15 years earlier. 200 motorcycles formed the procession. Riders from every club in Arizona coming to pay respects to a boy who'd become a legend in the Brotherhood. The service was held under a desert sky so blue it hurt to look at, and Reaper delivered the eulogy in a voice that didn't shake, even though his hands did. "Mason taught us something that a lot of grown men forget," Reaper said, standing before the small casket covered in flowers and motorcycle club patches. "He taught us that brotherhood isn't about how tough you are or how many miles you've ridden. It's about showing up. It's about answering the call when someone needs you, even if, especially if, that someone is a stranger." He paused, looking at Rachel Carter in the front row, her face devastated but somehow peaceful. Mason didn't get to grow old. He didn't get to ride his own Harley down Route 66 or feel the wind in his hair on a desert highway. But he got something better. He got to be loved, completely and without condition, by 45 brothers who would have moved heaven and earth for him. And that's a gift most people never receive, no matter how long they live. Reaper reached into his vest and pulled out the photo Sophia had posted 3 months ago, Mason bald and smiling, holding his motorcycle drawing. "We're establishing a charity in Mason's name, Mason's Riders. Its mission is simple: grant final wishes to terminally ill children. If a kid wants to meet bikers, see a motorcycle, or smell barbecue smoke one last time, we show up. No questions, no hesitation. Because that's what Mason taught us to do." The Arizona Nomads were the first to commit, followed by chapters in Tucson, Flagstaff, and Yuma. Within a month, Hells Angels chapters in California, Nevada, and New Mexico had joined. Within 6 months, Mason's Riders was operating in 12 states. Within a year, they'd granted 47 wishes. Reaper visited 2 graves after the funeral: Mason's fresh plot under a young mesquite tree and Tyler's weathered headstone 50 yards away. He knelt between them, a father who'd lost 1 son and found redemption in saving dozens more. "I couldn't save you, Tyler," Reaper said to the headstone. "I wasn't there when you needed me. But Mason, he needed us, and we showed up. And because of him, we're going to show up for every kid who asks." That's my promise to you both." The wind carried his words across the cemetery, past the American flags that marked veterans' graves, past the fresh flowers and faded photographs of lives that had mattered to someone. And somewhere in that desert wind, Reaper felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Forgiveness. Mason Carter had lived 8 years, 3 of them fighting a disease that should have killed him faster. But in his final 3 months, he'd lived more fully than most people do in 8 decades. He'd been loved by a mother who never gave up, cared for by nurses who became family, and claimed by 45 men who proved that angels don't always have halos. Sometimes they have leather vests and loud pipes and hearts big enough to hold a dying boy's last wish. And every Saturday, without fail, the Arizona nomads rode past Phoenix Children's Hospital. They no longer saw Mason's face in the window, but they rode anyway, because somewhere in that building, another kid was watching. Another kid was hoping. Another kid needed to know that Brotherhood was real, that people showed up, and that even in the darkest moments, there was still barbecue smoke and the rumble of Harleys and the promise that you didn't have to face the end alone. That was Mason's legacy, and it would ride forever. If you believe that real brotherhood means showing up for the impossible, dropping everything when someone needs you, and proving that the toughest warriors have the biggest hearts, then smash that like button and share Mason's story with everyone you know. Subscribe right now, because we're documenting the untold stories of American bikers who live by a code stronger than any law. Also, check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.